LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, a special delayed Monday morning edition. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out about 36 of the weekend's best clips, mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, and that's the corporate media here in the United States. And then I'll also be adding a couple quasi-news political comedy clips from last weekend's Saturday Night Live. I'll be covering the topics you can see listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there so you can skip to the topics that most interest you. I'll be covering the protests and even some riots over race and cops in American cities over the last week in reaction to the grand jury in New York not indicting the police officer who killed Eric Garner, and that builds on what has been going on in Ferguson, Missouri for quite a while. So I'll be spending about half the clips for the show on that. Then I should also have a bunch of clips on this failed hostage rescue in Yemen. 4 or 5 clips on that, and several clips on this torture report from the U.S. Senate that is supposed to come out possibly on Tuesday. And then I'll also end with some clips on ongoing controversy about President Obama's executive action to defer deportation of millions of undocumented immigrants. But I want to start, as usual, with a political comedy clip, but it's not going to be from Saturday Night Live, because the clip that most amused me, I think, from all the clips I'm going to show you was from the Fox News Sunday interview of Rush Limbaugh. And it's not really a political clip, it's actually more of something you might want to buy for your children for the holidays that Chris Wallace helpfully asked Rush Limbaugh about this morning, that you can see over, or yesterday morning, I should say, that you can see over in this clip.
Finally, you have just put out the latest in your series of children's books, and I think a lot of people may not know that you're writing children's books, and it's got a great cover. And there you are, Rush, Revere, and the American Revolution, where Rush goes back in time with, of course, his talking horse, Liberty.
Thank you very much.
Why are you doing this?
It's a labor of love. Well, because I want young people who I don't reach on the radio to know the truth of the country. I want them to love America. I want them to know the truth of the founding, the incredible people that did it, and we want to take readers to these events, not make it cut and dried memorization history. You have a time-traveling horse, a smart aleck talking horse. Rush Revere, me, is a substitute teacher, takes students with him. It's a great vehicle because we can go to any point in American history and relive it and treat it exactly as it happened, written for 8 to 12-year-olds. And it's just the third book is out now, and it's dedicated to the military and the problems that military people have when with the children of families whose parents, moms, and dads are deployed. Kids don't understand it. We address that in this book. We have a devotion and awe of the U.S. military, so this American Revolution book is dedicated to them. But it's all about a mission, Chris, of getting the truth of the founding of this country out and why it's great, why it is exceptional. There's nothing political in these books. It's just the truth. It's fun. And the reader is taken right to these events and interacts. The kids from this substitute class are taken to these events and actually interact with these great Americans. It's a fun thing to do, and the reaction that we're getting from readers is beyond our expectations.
And
it's a great.
So you heard at the end there, the Rush Revere books, there's nothing political in there, it's just the truth, and I don't want to prejudge because I haven't seen the books, but I'm actually thinking I may even give a little money to Rush Limbaugh and get that book so I can tell you if it's actually just the truth and not political. But Rush Revere and his talking horse go back through history for 8 to 12-year-olds. I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, but now I want to get to a more serious subject, the racism in the criminal justice system that I've been talking about for quite a while, especially based on this book, the New Jim Crow there, from Michelle Alexander, about how our criminal justice system is a system of racial control. And I talked about how I agree with a lot of that theory or a lot of that argument, though I have some problems with it, and I'll get to that a little more when I show some clips about that specifically. but there actually was a little humor on Saturday Night Live about this not very humorous subject. First, I want to show a clip from, they're both from Weekend Update, from the two co-hosts. One's going to be from Michael Che, the other from Colin Jost. Here's Michael Che. I think this is more ironic humor than really really funny humor, but you can tell me what you think after I show you that clip from Saturday Night Live on Saturday here.
Oh, come on, man. Give him a break, Colin. It was a tough call. It's not like there was video of it.
Oh, well, actually, there was.
Oh, but I mean, it was inadmissible in court.
Oh, no, the jury saw it.
They saw the video, but it was like blurry and far away.
Actually, it was pretty clear and close up.
Oh, so the cop didn't really choke that guy?
No, he definitely did.
Well, I mean, it's sad, but Garner shouldn't have killed all those people if,
Well, actually, he was just selling loose cigarettes.
Oh, for real?
Che, did you honestly not know any of this?
No, I knew it. I'm just surprised every damn time I hear it. It never gets easier. Both grand juries failed to indict those cops. It used to be you said you were racist to get out of jury duty. Now being racist seems like a requirement. I mean, these decisions were so bad that I might actually stop avoiding jury duty. And usually I can't serve because of my two children. They're both very sick and very made up. But now I can't wait to go. I might just show up at court and see if they take walk-ins. Better juries are our only hope. It's either that or we can play these videos in photo negative so that the cops are black and the victims are white, and then maybe somebody will go to jail.
So, yeah, some of that was funny, though. Like I said, I think it was more ironic than funny, and that's sort of the racial analysis from the African-American co-host of Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update. And Colin Jost apparently is actually from Staten Island, and he gives it kind of a different perspective, especially pointing out that a lot of the people who live in Staten Island are police officers or families of police officers. I mean, a lot more than in the general area of New York, and he uses that to make his own point from sort of the other side of the racial divide, I guess, as the I guess I said Michael Che was the African-American co-host of Weekend Update, so I guess that means he's the white guy co-host of Weekend Update, making that point over here.
Here's the thing, okay? I'm from Staten Island, okay? Staten Island is a great place to live. It is a terrible place to hold a grand jury involving race and cops. Staten Island is like 80% white and like 95% cops. The other 5% is split between firefighters and members of the Wu-Tang Clan. That's why nothing about this grand jury seemed fair. It's like when they moved the Rodney King trial to the whitest suburb of L.A., or for people under 30, it's like Peter Dinklage was on trial in Game of Thrones and his dad was the judge. So please, everyone's sake, please keep the cop trials out of Staten Island. We're not ready for these complicated modern issues yet. We still arrive in Manhattan every day huddled in a boat.
So actually, I thought that one was a little more funny and less ironic, and I especially like the Game of Thrones reference, but I'm a Game of Thrones fan, and having shown sort of the attempt to make it into finding jokes and humor in what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, and with Eric Garner in New York, now I'm going to get to the more serious clips. First, I want to show Pierre Thomas from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, the report that they aired from him, just sort of giving the general outline of what's been going on in the last week, and quoting several of the newsmakers involved over in this clip.
New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Los Angeles. Thousands outraged by allegations of excessive force by police, especially white officers, against blacks. New Chance joining No Justice, No Peace as part of the modern-day civil rights lexicon, and new symbols ignited by these searing images. Eric Garner dead at the hands of the NYPD. Michael Brown, unarmed, shot in Ferguson. Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy with a toy gun, shot by police after a 2-second confrontation in Cleveland.
People are outraged at what we see, and we cannot stand, and we refuse to watch.
And this week, the Justice Department accusing Cleveland police of systemic misconduct.
The Cleveland Division of Public Police engages in a pattern and practice of using excessive force.
In one case cited by federal officials, Cleveland police fired more than 130 rounds into a car, killing an unarmed black man and woman after a high-speed chase. In the last 5 years, the Justice Department has opened more than 20 investigations into police departments across the country. Justice officials are enforcing 15 agreements with law enforcement agencies, often to correct unconstitutional policing practices. Now, President Obama is calling for body cameras on officers. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio wants police retraining and raised eyebrows with this comment about the police and his son, who is biracial.
We've had to literally train him, as families have all over this city for decades, in how to take special care in any encounter he has with the police officers who are there to protect him.
But those who support law enforcement suggest that the levels of police bias are being overstated.
I think interjecting race into the conversation is hugely problematic for the country. To paint the masses of hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers who have a very difficult job to do, to paint them all with one brush is a mistake.
By all accounts, an unhealthy situation. Old wounds proving difficult to heal, with more tense days to come.
So yeah, that was Pierre Thomas's report on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which I thought was the best overview of what's been happening in the last week from all of the different news programs yesterday morning. And I think the most interesting guest to hear from on the issue wasn't from ABC, but was from NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd actually had the widow of Eric Garner, I think Esaw Garner. She was on with the Reverend Al Sharpton, I guess because Al Sharpton works for MSNBC, and he has worked closely with the family of Eric Garner. They were able to get this exclusive interview, and first, here's how she gave her, initial comments to, her reaction to what happened with the grand jury, talking to Chuck Todd over in this clip.
I feel that he was murdered unjustly. I don't even feel like it's a black and white thing, honestly. In my opinion, I really don't feel like it's a black and white thing. I feel like it's just something that he continued to do, and the police knew. They knew. It wasn't like it was a shock. They knew. Mm-hmm. They knew him by name. They harassed us. They said things to us. We would go shopping, they, hi, cigarette man, hey, cigarette man wife, stuff like that. And I would just say, Eric, just keep walking. Don't say anything. Don't respond. Don't give them a reason to do anything to you. And, and he just felt like, he said, babe, they keep harassing me. And I say, just ignore them, Eric. And he said, but how much can I ignore them? And I would say, just stay away from the block, Just find something else to do. And he's like, what else can I do? I keep getting sick. He tried working with the Parks Department, but he had asthma, he had issues, heavy guy. And he was very lazy. He didn't like to do anything. He wasn't used to it, so.
You say he was murdered.
Well, that was kind of strange at the end there, where she called her dead husband lazy, but what she said about it not being a black and white thing, I think that's kind of an interesting reaction from a family member of Eric Garner. And I've heard, I think there definitely is a racial aspect, but then there's more than a racial aspect to it. So I agree and disagree with that analysis. And someone who I think made a good point on that, I'm going to show you in this clip. This is from CNN State of the Union. She had on, Candy Crowley had on the Castro brothers. Let me make sure. Julian Castro is currently the Secretary of Health and Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration, and then Joaquin Castro is a congressperson from Texas. So they were both on, and Candy Crowley asked, I believe it was Joaquin, that I can't remember who she asked, whether this was a racial thing, and you'll see that I think it was Joaquin brought up the killing of a white kid in San Antonio and said that this whole thing while there is a racial aspect for Latinos as well as for African Americans, that there's also something beyond the racial aspect, just in terms of lack of accountability of police, or I mean, that last part I'm adding myself. But here you can see that clip from CNN State of the Union this morning here.
I mean, you obviously have spent a lot of time in San Antonio, actually, both of you. Do you feel a sense of tension between Hispanic communities and police?
There are a lot of the same concerns that you see in African American communities, but I think it's also evident over the years that no community is immune from troubles with the police. In San Antonio right now, for example, there's a case going on where a white student was shot and killed by a campus police officer, and yesterday marked the year anniversary, and that case still has not been presented to a grand jury. So it's mostly communities of color, especially African Americans, but I think nobody is immune, and particularly younger folks tend to have these run-ins with police.
Right. Is there a federal solution? Or a part of a solution? There's no one.
Yeah, I think what we've seen come out of this really is three things: retraining of police so that they're better able to handle these situations; body cameras, which are not a panacea but are a positive and strong step; and 84% of Americans support making sure that we have body cameras there. And then also changing the grand jury system.
And the president took a strong step, I believe, in Attorney General Holder in making clear that the federal government is pursuing investigations in Ferguson and in Staten Island with respect to Eric Garner, but also that we're going to look at this in the larger context of the relationship between communities of color and the police. The funding for body cameras for local jurisdictions is a very good first start.
And also,
so I'll show some more clips on some of the solutions, like body cameras and changing the grand jury system. There several people talk about solutions, and some clips I'm going to show in a few minutes, but I thought that was interesting, seeing Joaquin Castro make the argument that there is a power aspect, that white people have to be afraid of the police too, which I'll talk about a little more when I show some clips from Bill de Blasio. But I want to get back to one more clip from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd's interview with Al Sharpton and Esaw Garner, where Chuck Todd actually confronted Al Sharpton with these comments from the police union spokesperson in New York, saying that Eric Garner shouldn't have resisted arrest, and so kind of blaming Eric Garner for his own death. And Chuck Todd posed this question to Al Sharpton, but you'll see the camera goes immediately to the widow, Esaw Garner, and she has a definite emotional reaction, and then Chuck Todd lets her answer, and so you can see that whole clip over here.
I want to get you to react to something that Patrick Lynch, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association president in New York, said on Thursday. Here's what he said.
You cannot resist arrest, because resisting arrest leads to confrontation. Confrontation leads to tragedy. So we feel badly that there was a loss of life. But unfortunately, Mr. Garner made a choice that day to resist arrest.
Well,
blaming Mr. Garner.
First of all, to blame the victim, the insensitivity of that is striking. But it's also when you look at the video, the difference between Ferguson and Staten Island, even though we bring them together for this march, is there's a video. And if you see in the video a man taken down on the ground with police over him, and then you continue to choke him and the chokehold is illegal, are you now saying at the worst case scenario, if he had resisted arrest and clearly he didn't, that the penalty then is that you choke him to death? I mean, I think it's the most absurd premise that this person could have arrested.
Mrs. Garner, you wanted to react to that. I heard you just, I watched your eyes, I watched your head shake.
Because, I'm not going to say he was a career criminal, but I'm going to say he had a past of being arrested. And he never, not once, ever resisted arrest. He's done a little bit of time, and he's accepted his time when the judge handed it to him. Babe, I'll be home. They gave me 2.5.
Right.
So a person, as far as my history in New York City, I've seen a lot of people with resist arrest. I've seen people pulled out guns on cops and live.
But that's the point.
I actually had to be, I feel a little bit amused by that argument there from the widow of Eric Garner, Esaw Garner, because when I was a public defender, I heard that argument multiple times. It was kind of almost a cliche by the end, because that's a kind of argument that really makes sense, but you could never argue that in front of the jury, because basically the argument is, oh, I couldn't have been resisting arrest because look at how many times I've been arrested and I never resisted before. That is not a good jury argument, even though it makes complete sense to me and I can understand why she would say that. But somehow I think you can understand why you can't actually make that argument. And I also want to show another, that was what the Policeman Benevolent Association, and I'm going to show the national president of, I think it's the Fraternal Order of Police. I think that, I'm not sure I got his organization right, but another spokesman for police. He makes an argument about the Eric Garner case that actually reminded me of another like unusable argument that people used to talk about when I was a public defender, which I will explain after I show you that clip over here.
Well, first of all, we believe that the existing judicial system works. The grand jury system and police review boards in certain cities have shown some promise. But the bottom line is rank and file police officers have always wanted more training and welcome that training. You know, I don't believe that under current economic times with the huge reduction in law enforcement officers around this country that training has kept up. But I also don't believe that there's a systemic problem in law enforcement. I believe that the media and others have taken a couple of incidents. There are 14 million arrests in this country every year, and we have less than 300 police officers that have been indicted for excessive force since 2009.
But there is a trust gap. You acknowledge that,
absolutely, right? A trust gap. But it takes a holistic approach. It's not just law enforcement's problem. The common denominator is poverty. In every country in the world where there's a economic problem in a neighborhood,
then you have a crime.
You have a higher crime, and then people like the mayor who have to send us in to deal with the problems.
Mr. Vance, I think.
Now the argument I was talking about that Chuck Canterbury there made about that I thought was kind of silly was the one about the 14 million arrests and then how many police officers are indicted. Of course, we've seen how hard it is to get a police officer indicted, so that doesn't really tell you how many times they use excessive force or even kill people. And what I found amusing about that is because it reminded me of this argument. I mean, it's kind of the gallows humor of the people who handle murder cases in the public defender's office. One thing I heard people, like, when they were brainstorming for arguments, they would say, well, think of all the people he didn't kill. That was like an argument. Well, of course, no one ever made that argument, and that's kind of like, look at all the 14 million arrests where we didn't kill anybody. That, I don't know, that doesn't seem like the strongest of arguments in either case, either in a murder case or police misconduct case. But I actually, hold on, let me get my list here. I also want to show you some of the other police officers who commented on this case or the people who took the side of the police. And the first person I want to show is the actual commissioner of the New York Police Department, William Bratton, and he kind of dodged the question. He was on CBS's Face the Nation, and Bob Schieffer talked about the video and how Eric Garner said he couldn't breathe 11 times, and what he uses this phrase. Actually, he isn't the one who dodged the question. I'll get to that one in a minute. But it was actually Bill de Blasio who dodged the question about whether he accepted the grand jury's decision or not. But William Bratton, he uses this phrase about what happened. He said it was lawful but awful, which I had never heard before. And he made some other points I will talk about after I show you that clip over here.
How did you feel, Commissioner, you personally, when you saw this video and you heard him 11 times say, "I can't breathe"? That must have been a hard thing for you as the commissioner to watch.
Well, I don't think that anybody that watches that video is not disturbed by what they saw. That policing involving use of force is, it always looks awful. We have an expression, lawful but awful. The criminal courts have decided, the district attorney's grand jury has decided there were no criminal actions involved. We're now going to have to see if the actions the office is engaged in were in violation of our policies and procedures. Civil rights investigation will determine if there are any violations of his civil rights.
Well, did it appear to you?
So yeah, that's the reaction of the commissioner of the New York police. And so since I'm going to show you the people who are taking the police side, which isn't a lot of people in the Eric Garner cases, I'll get to in a few minutes. I'm going to show some clips about how there's actually bipartisan negative reaction to the grand jury's decision not to indict the police officer who did the chokehold on Eric Garner. But kind of on the side of the police is conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh, who was on Fox News Sunday. I don't know why they brought him on to comment on this particular issue, but I want to show you first a clip where he talks about how it's really about grievance politics, and that it's this grievance politics is what's tearing the U.S. apart. It's not racism. It's those people who are upset about racism. And at the end of his answer, they actually show the protests that were in Berkeley, California on Saturday night. I don't know, maybe to emphasize his point. And you'll see in a minute when I show an additional clip from Rush Limbaugh and Chris Wallace that Chris Wallace admits he's a friend of Rush. And anyway, here's Rush Limbaugh blaming what's going on, or the protests and some of the riots, on people who are stoking up grievances in this country over in this clip.
I think that there is a grievance politics in this country that's tearing the country apart, Chris. I think what happened in the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri, and what happened here in Staten Island does not warrant this, because the grand jury rendered a correct verdict in Ferguson. New York is a little bit different, but this would have happened, I think, no matter what the grand jury in Ferguson said. I think the real thing to note here is that this is tearing the country apart. It is literally ripping our fabric apart. And the President of the United States, one thing about him, he's a great orator. You put the right words on the teleprompter, and this man can deliver soaring, inspiring rhetoric. I ask you to remember his 2008 campaign in front of the styrofoam columns at Denver during the convention speech. If he wants to, he can inspire. And I think it's called for in this situation. This is not good for the country, what's happening here, because it isn't, I don't think, full-fledged legitimate. It's not based on real world grievance. It's grievance that's being amplified and made up. And the president, if you ask me, could do a lot to stop this by telling people to respect the criminal justice system. There's nothing here that's designed, as they would have you believe, to purposely get it wrong, to purposely screw people. It's not the case. And presidents are supposed to be uplifting. They're supposed to be inspiring.
Let me pick up on that, because we have...
Yeah, and so I'm going to show you that next question in just a minute, but I just think what Rush Limbaugh said there, that's such a twisted way of looking at the whole situation, I think, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then you can see in the question I cut off there, Chris Wallace then actually confronts Rush with the possibility that there might actually be racism in our society. He talks about what Mayor of New York Bill de Blasio said, because he has a son of color. He's in a mixed race marriage, and so he talks about how he had to have a talk with his African American son about racism. And so Chris Wallace confronts Rush Limbaugh with that, and also with the fact that when African Americans are stopped, they're three times more likely to get searched than whites. And you can see Rush Limbaugh's reaction is, talking more. He has this straw man, thing. Things aren't perfect and rosy, but they're saying that we haven't made any progress at all. And well, I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip here.
Let me pick up on that, because we have some sound both from President Obama and from New York City Mayor de Blasio describing the situation. Here they are.
This is an American problem. When anybody in this country is not being treated equally under the law, that's a problem. And it's my job as president to help solve it.
Our police are here to protect us, and we honor that. And at the same time, There's a history we have to overcome because for so many of our young people, there's a fear. And for so many of our families, there's a fear.
I want you to react to that, Rush, but I want to put into that, and one of the things that critics and some of the demonstrators cite is, for instance, that black drivers who are stopped for a traffic stop are 3 times as likely to be searched as white drivers. So what do you think of them in this perception of unfairness in the criminal justice system?
I don't think that things are rosy and perfect in America, but to say that they're no better, as the mayor of New York said, it's absurd. We've made all kinds of efforts to improve race relations in this country. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, affirmative action, we have bent over backwards. Is it all perfect? No, it's not. But there's no acknowledgement of any of the progress, Chris. If you listen to these people, the president, the mayor of New York, you would think it's 200 years ago. You would think we haven't even started working on these problems, and that's not true. And I think for the president to promote this division, as he just did in that clip that you said, and mischaracterize what happened here. He's talking in large part about Ferguson, and what he described did not happen in Ferguson. And what most of the media is describing did not happen in Ferguson, Missouri. There was no hands up, don't shoot. It didn't happen. And that's tearing this country apart. We have people to whom the truth is relative. And they're using whatever power they have to try to redefine the truth for the advancement of their own political agenda. And it's just not productive. And the president taking sides in this in a way that further divides the country, I find reprehensible.
Reprehensible. I guess it is reprehensible when people try to redefine the truth in order to advance their political agenda. I can't think of anyone who does that. Who could it be? But that actually was not the silliest part of Rush Limbaugh's commentary on the whole Eric Ferguson situation. I think the silliest thing came in this clip. I told you this is the one where Chris Wallace actually admits that he's a friend of Rush Limbaugh and that he agreed with him on Ferguson, Missouri, and you'll see he slips in, that there was reasonable doubt in that case, is what he says, which of course was not the standard that the grand jury was supposed to be following in the Ferguson, Missouri case of Michael Brown. But then, even after agreeing with Rush Limbaugh on Ferguson and saying he's his friend, Chris Wallace then says, but what about this chokehold thing? Why are you saying it's not a chokehold? And you'll see Rush Limbaugh's answer. This is one of my favorite quotes from Rush Limbaugh, or this is my favorite quote from Rush Limbaugh in the series of answers on race and Ferguson and Eric Garner in New York, how he describes the chokehold that was used on Eric Garner over in this clip.
Let's talk, though, you talk about Ferguson, and frankly, I agree with you. I think that's a case where there was plenty of reasonable doubt about what Officer Wilson did. But let's talk about the Eric Garner case, which a lot of people think is different. In fact, at the beginning, you said that you were troubled by what happened in the Eric Garner case, the heavy-set black man who was taken down in Staten Island. But you now say that he was not choked. It was not a chokehold. And I guess the question I have, and I ask this with all due respect, we're friends. What are you talking about that it's not a chokehold?
I'm listening to experts in the police departments around the country that I know tell me it's not a chokehold. I'm listening to certain things I've read in the media quoting police officials and those who train police saying that this was not a chokehold. It might have been carotid restriction, but it was not a chokehold. But Chris, none of this, this all misses the point. What was Eric Garner doing? He was selling cigarettes, loose cigarettes. And the police in New York, because they're so eager for tax collection, what is being done here with regard to taxes and the state's desire to collect them no matter what, how many cops were descended on that situation? For cigarettes, how many people smoking marijuana did the cops pass by and ignore on the way to Eric Garner? You've got $13 a carton, $13 a pack in New York City. Over $6 of that is taxes. And the authorities are telling the cops, you go out and you stop that because they're so intent on collecting tax revenue. I think the real outrage here is that an American died while the state is enforcing tax collection on cigarettes. This is just absurd. And people talk about the left They want a big state. They want a powerful state. Well, here it is. You've got to take all of it. If you want a powerful state, there's your police force acting on demands of the authorities to go out and make sure that every dime of tax is collected, particularly from tobacco. Look how we stigmatize tobacco.
Let me,
to the point now that it's so despised and reviled that a guy loses his life selling single cigarettes in New York City. It's absurd.
Absurd. And actually, I wasn't that surprised to hear Rush Limbaugh blame the death of Eric Garner on liberals and taxes, but the thing that I found most amusing was earlier at the beginning of that clip where he said it was not a chokehold, it may have been a carotid restriction. I don't know. Does that make any sense to anybody? You can let me know what you think down in the comments section, and that's the last of the Rush Limbaugh clips on this. I don't know how he got to be an expert on Fox News, but I've definitely found it entertaining. So in that sense, I guess it was good television. It just, I don't think it was very good news journalism television. But I guess I want to sort of clear my palette of Rush Limbaugh by getting a little more reasonable analysis from the head of the NAACP, Cornell, William Brooks, who was over on CBS's Face the Nation, and he got sort of a softball question from Bob Schieffer about, so is the killing, or these recent incidents of the killing of black men by police officers, is that just a coincidence? And here you can hear someone actually talk about there being a pattern of racism in the country over in this clip.
Let me just ask you about these incidents that have happened. Do you think they happened by coincidence? Do you think what happened in Missouri, people in New York saw that, and this may have triggered the reactions there? We know what has been going on in Cleveland. Is there a connection between these three things? Did they happen by coincidence? Or are a lot of communities facing the very same problem, and it just it all happened at once here?
The commission understands this, as do the citizens of New York and citizens all across the country, that what we see here in terms of these incidents of police brutality and misconduct is a part of a larger, longer narrative where you have stop and frisk policies, where you have generations of young men who've been criminalized and arrested en masse. The point being here is we have a model of policing that is predicated on essentially operating in the community and not being of the community. And that is fundamentally a problem. And so this is part of a longer narrative. We simply can't treat these as individual incidents to be assessed in that way without talking about larger reform in terms of passing the federal Racial Profiling Act, having a national standard for the excessive use of force, looking at and implementing a body camera policy, and again, fundamentally changing our policing model. Nothing less than that is sufficient.
Let me.
So yeah, those solutions that Cornell William Brooks talked about, I think those are all good solutions, and I also agree with his analysis of the pattern of racism, and the history of racism in our society. Although, I guess, as a white person agreeing with him, that isn't as common as African Americans agreeing with him, according to this recent poll that was NBC Marist poll, I think, that was shown over on NBC's Meet the Press yesterday morning. And here's Chuck Todd showing some of those numbers that I'll talk about a little more after you see it here.
We asked, do you agree or disagree with this? Are there different standards in the law enforcement community that they apply to blacks and whites? Whites, a majority disagree that there are different standards, 51%. African Americans, 82% agree that there are different standards applied. How about confidence that the police, the law enforcement community will treat races equally? 52% of whites have a great deal of confidence. 43% of African Americans have very little confidence. And of course, confidence in the legal system after Ferguson, after Staten Island, has it increased or decreased? In this case, both whites and blacks say their confidence in the legal system is decreased. Whites, 35% say it's decreased, with blacks, 70%. Mayor Reed?
So, yeah, there you can see that there is kind of a divide, as you might expect, between how whites and blacks view racism in the criminal justice system. But one bright spot in all of that was what I was talking about earlier, that there was sort of a bipartisan agreement, not completely, as you saw from Rush Limbaugh there, but bipartisan agreement on the Eric Garner grand jury not indicting being a bad thing. And I want to show first a report from Chuck Todd. This is kind of long. I think it may be about 2.5, 3 minutes long, talking about all the different newsmakers, politicians from both sides of the aisle who came out saying that they were troubled by what happened with the grand jury in the Eric Garner case over in this clip.
We asked, do you agree or disagree with this? Are there different standards to the streets? What was different this week, though, was even as protesters demonstrated from coast to coast, politicians from across the political spectrum came together to condemn the New York decision.
Mr. Garner's death is one of several recent incidents across our great country that have tested the sense of trust that must exist between law enforcement and the communities they are charged to serve and to protect.
I asked them, I said, what do you want? What is the point of this? They said they want accountability from the NYPD, from the prosecutor over in Staten Island. And they said that they are going to be out here every night marching until they get an indictment in the death of Eric Garner.
He got a camera. He got a camera.
I do think that the American people deserve more answers about what really happened here and was our system of justice handled properly.
The crowd is reflective of a lot of people in New York City that are tired of autocratic, unaccountable police.
When you're dealing with something as deeply rooted as racism or bias in any society, you got to have vigilance, but you have to recognize that it's going to take some time, and you just have to be steady so that you don't give up.
I had dinner with Condi the other night, and we talked about this subject. And yeah, she just said you just got to understand that there are a lot of black folks around that are just incredibly, or more and more distrusting of law enforcement, which is a shame, because law enforcement's job is to protect everybody.
Shirley and I have had to talk to Dante for years about the dangers that he may face. We've had to literally train him, as families have all over this city for decades, in how to take special care in any encounter he has with the police officers who are there to protect him.
So as you can see in that clip, there are Republicans. It is more bipartisan than the reaction to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri with Michael Brown, where it seemed it was most Republicans were not having any problem with the grand jury. They, accepted the police officer's version, and since there was no videotape, I guess that was enough for people who don't have more of a natural mistrust for the police officer version, which is, I guess, most Americans, especially if you saw that poll from Chuck Todd. And I want to show a clip of Chuck Todd asking Al Sharpton about this bipartisan reaction to what happened with the Eric Garner grand jury and asking him if that's progress. And you'll see Al Sharpton says it's only progress if it leads to actual legislation over in this clip.
The reaction, it seems, to this grand jury non-decision, much different than the reaction to what happened in Ferguson. We had a more polarized reaction. This one not so polarized. Do you see that as progress?
I see it as progress as long as we take it to some real change. This Saturday we're having a national march that Ms. Garner and the family from Ferguson is leading to call for congressional action. The Congress needs to not only do hearings, we need to deal with the jurisdictional threshold of how you make a federal case. How will she get her day in court? You've got to be able to move the jurisdictional threshold, which Congress can do. Congress need to put money in the Justice Department to investigate these cases. We've got to go bring protest to where it goes into legislation. Otherwise, we'll be back here again.
Which is what.
So again, that's another one of the clips that shows some good solutions or good political reactions to what's going on. Although I'm not sure they address the, I talked about the new Jim Crow that talks about it's really the drug war and racism inherent in the criminal justice system, and without getting rid of the drug war and other things, the militarization of the police and several other issues that you haven't really heard addressed there, that you're not really going to solve this problem. And I think also the problem expands or goes to more than just people of color. Like I said, there are also problems with the police abuse of power having nothing to do with racism, just lack of accountability. And so some of those solutions will increase accountability on the police, which is good. But I also want to show a clip from this person who's on President Obama's commission to try to deal with this. He's Commissioner Charles Ramsey he's a police commissioner, and he talks about this broken windows policing policy that I think actually is another one of the causes beyond racism. This idea that the police have to be really strict on any violation of the law. If I agree with Rush Limbaugh on anything, it was the part of his rant there that, and it also matches up with something that Senator Rand Paul said about the whole Eric Garner thing about, too strict enforcement of a stupid tax was part of the problem. And that's kind of this whole broken windows thing. And I want to show, here's Charles Ramsey, Commissioner Charles Ramsey, who's a police officer who's on the President's commission, who's looking into this, talking about trying to defend broken windows, even though he admits in his answer that it has a lot of negative effects on the community here.
Best when we're united as a family.
Is this a bipartisan moment around this?
Wait.
Let me just real quickly comment on that, the notion that we need to get away from broken windows type policing. I think we can do both. One of my deputies mentioned something at a staff meeting the other day, and that is that there's been a lot of research in policing about effectiveness of strategies, hotspot policing, foot patrols, things of that nature, but very little, if any, on the after effects of such strategies in terms of alienation of communities. And that's what we have to take a look at. What's the collateral damage that's caused when we engage in certain policing strategies? If we know that and understand it, we can avoid it. And so I think you can do both effectively, but we have to be able to deal with a range of issues, from simple disorder type things to serious crime.
Mr. Vance, very quick.
As far as bias goes,
I'm not a big fan of the broken windows style of policing. Refers to even if someone throws a rock and breaks a window, or if they have broken windows in an abandoned building, we have to cite people for that, because once you let things start to deteriorate, even in the smallest degree, then that gives people the feeling that they can just do anything, and more serious crimes happen. And that's what supposedly that's Rudy Giuliani's argument about what he did in New York City to rid it of its crime problem. And I'm kind of suspicious of Rudy Giuliani and of the broken windows system of policing, especially now that crime has come down so much since when it was conceived in the 90s. Now that there's such a lower crime rate, it does a lot more harm than good, I guess, based on what Commissioner Charles Ramsey even admitted in his answer, that there are these alienation effects on the community. And actually, I skipped over a clip I wanted to show on the bipartisan approach or reaction to the Eric Garner decision in New York from that grand jury. I wanted to show Republican John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, who looks very much like he's running for president after he was just reelected in November with I think won by 30 points, which is a big win for anyone. And you can see from his reaction, he seems to be trying to go the way of Rand Paul a little, and saying nice things that might expand the Republican Party outside angry white males. But I don't think he does a very good job of it. You can let me know what you think after I show you that clip here.
Best when we're united as a family.
Is this a bipartisan moment around this issue? We just heard Mayor de Blasio lay out his agenda for this. Is this something where you can have common cause with people like Mayor de Blasio, President Obama?
Well, there isn't any question that when you have a big chunk of the community that says we've been left out, and look, we've been addressing that in the 4 years I've been in. For example, as you know, there's a great road between downtown Cleveland and the Cleveland Clinic. We're going to spend $400 million fixing that, improving that road, and we've set aside 20% of all of those dollars for minority contractors to be able to become majority contractors, to promote entrepreneurship. So this is something that we have been aware of for a long time, because in Ohio, I think what works best is when everybody feels as though they have a chance, that everybody who has grievances can be heard. And that's what we're doing in the state, trying to lift everyone, whether you're a minority, whether you are disabled, whether you are mentally ill. We want everybody to at least have the sense that somebody listens to them and that there's a place for them in our society. It's, I think, what the Lord wants us to do, George.
It's what the Lord wants us to do. Well, I think that you have to have a lot of faith to think that anything he said there was going to be really helpful to any of the problems that have been exposed by these recent grand jury non-indictments. And you saw at the beginning of that clip that George Stephanopoulos referred to having shown his interview with New York Mayor Bill de Blasio. And now I'm going to show a couple clips from that interview. First, here's George Stephanopoulos asking, this is the one I mistakenly, when I introduced the clip from Commissioner William Bratton from the New York Police Department, I mistakenly said that he dodged the question about the grand jury decision when it was actually a later clip. This is that clip where you can see Mayor Bill de Blasio, when George Stephanopoulos asks him, you know, you promised a fair process. Are we going to get it? Did you think we got a fair process now that you've seen the grand jury decision? You'll see several times dodging by Mayor de Blasio. Instead of saying that he won't say he respects the grand jury decision, but he respects the grand jury process. You can tell me after you see the clip if it's a dodge or if that's a real distinction after you see George Stephanopoulos confront him with what he promised and what happened over in this clip.
New York City. And back in August, you promised to ensure a fair and justified outcome in the Garner case. Do you believe the grand jury's decision met that standard?
George, I make it a point not to talk about any element of the judicial process per se. I talk about what we have to do to fix the relationship between police and community.
Others are willing to. Why not you?
Because as an executive in public service, I think it's important to respect the judicial process. But
so you respect the grand jury's decision?
Respect the process. But the point here is we have a whole series of things we have to do to change the dynamics in our city. This is true all over the country. We have to retrain police forces in how to work with communities differently. We have to work on things like body cameras that will provide a different level of transparency and accountability. This is something systemic, and we bluntly have to talk about the historic racial dynamics that underlie this.
So you respect the process but not the decision?
George, the point is we in public service who have an opportunity to change policies and approaches have to do that. This is not about one case. It's about something bigger that has to be addressed. And part of what I tried to say the night of the decision is that we have to have an honest conversation in this country about a history of racism. We have to have an honest conversation about the problem that has caused parents to feel their children may be in danger in their dynamics with police, when in fact police are there to protect them. We have to transcend that. And in this city, we've tried to begin that process in earnest with a series of policy changes that will really reach people.
But as you know, for
so yeah, obviously, Mayor de Blasio dodged the question several times there about whether he respected the decision of the grand jury, but the rest of what he said made a lot of sense, I thought, and, in terms of solutions. And he's actually had some conflict with his police department, and that's the next clip I want to show from the interview. George Stephanopoulos shows a clip I think I showed in a previous clip. There's the same guy, what's his name, Patrick Murphy, maybe? Is that racist to come up with some like Irish name for a New York police officer? I think that may be his actual name, who basically said that he thought Mayor de Blasio had thrown them under the bus, and George Stephanopoulos confronted Mayor de Blasio with that comment and his answers here.
But you did draw a lot of response with your comments about your son, Dante, the other day, when you asked, was he safe each night, and not only from crime, but also from the police? It drew a very sharp reaction from the head of the police union. Take a look.
What we need is a mayor to stand up with and for us as well. What police officers felt yesterday after that press conference is that they were thrown under the bus.
Throw the police under the bus?
No, of course not. I have immense respect for the men and women who protect us. In fact, what we're trying to do is make everyone safer in this equation. We're trying to protect all of our communities and protect the people who do this important work. To do that, we have to draw on police and community together. And you can't achieve that if you're not having a real conversation about what's happening. Of course, people respond when they see a tragedy like this. They see it through their own eyes, through their own prism of their family. And we can't deny that and act like that isn't a reality. And we're seeing it.
Are you really worried that your son is at risk from your own police department?
Look, I want to say it the right way because I think there's so much misunderstanding here. What parents have done for decades who have children of color, especially young men of color, is train them to be very careful when they have a connection with a police officer, when they have an encounter with a police officer. It's different for a white child. That's just the reality in this country. And with Dante, very early on, with my son, we said, look, if a police officer stops you, do everything he tells you to do. Don't move suddenly. Don't reach for your cell phone. Because we knew, sadly, there was a greater chance it might be misinterpreted if it was a young man of color. What we're striving towards is a day when every child can be told equally, not only are the police there to protect you, but they're going to assume that the young person is an innocent, law-abiding young person. That just is not always the reality today. And it's something we have to overcome so we can actually draw police and community closer together. But look, in terms of response, I'm just saying what people are actually experiencing and have been for decades. I've talked to a lot of families of color well before this coming, because I've said things like this before, and they've said to me over and over again that they appreciated someone finally acknowledging that they've had to have that conversation with their sons. It's a painful conversation. You can sense there's a contradiction in that conversation. We all want to look up to figures of authority, and everyone knows the police protect us. But there's that fear that there could be that one moment of misunderstanding with a young man of color, and that young man may never come back. That's what parents are so worried.
As you know, you're
Well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that. I guess it turns out I was racist because that police officer benevolent association, his name was Patrick Lynch, not Patrick Murphy. So I did come up with some stereotypical Irish name for him that wasn't his actual name. But I'm not sure I agree with Mayor Bill de Blasio about how you have to have a different conversation. I mean, I guess I shouldn't really say that but my point being that I think it may expand beyond the just the African American community, where I understand that there's a special need to have that conversation. But I mean, I would give the same advice to my own daughter, who is a white girl, obviously, that, you know, if you get pulled over, you like put both your hands on top of the steering wheel where they can see them till they come and tell you to do something else, and don't make any quick movements, and follow instructions, and don't argue. And, you know, if you want to argue, that time comes later. It doesn't come when you're confronted with someone with a gun who could shoot you at any time, right? I think that's advice that I would give to any person as a former public defender. And, you know, one of the things I've talked about when I talk about the new Jim Crow here, one of the problems I have with the whole racist criminal justice system argument is, when I was a public defender in St. Louis County, Missouri, what I saw completely fits that argument, because it was totally, racism was like there all the time, and it made my clients afraid to go to trial, because in St. Louis County, the population is something like 70 or 80% white, because the St. Louis city isn't in St. Louis County, although if you were to combine them together, it's like 50-50, and I'd say like 80 or 90% of my clients were African American when I was a public defender in St. Louis County, and there was like racism, I think, pervasive in the system, and I'm not surprised about what happened in Ferguson. But then I was a public defender in California here for a couple years in Placer County, California, which is pretty white. I mean, there's some like Latino population, and I did see some kind of racist stuff having to do with some African American clients. I even took one black client to trial, and also with Latinos. But the thing is, when I was a public defender in a mostly white rural county here in California, I saw some of the same police abuses against poor white people, and that's the problem I have with this argument. And I'm going to finish up and get to the next topic, which is the failed rescue attempt in Yemen to get a couple hostages, one an American, one a South African, and both the hostages died in the rescue attempt over the weekend. And to make that transition, I'm going to show you how Fox News Sunday introduced their show, or part of the introduction anyway. I found this kind of amusing. They were trumpeting the fact that they had Rush Limbaugh on to comment on the whole race and police issue, and how it was an exclusive interview like all the other programs wanted to get him. Although, actually, I thought about it, and there probably a couple of the other programs would have wanted to have him because he's entertaining and draws viewers, and I think Rush Limbaugh has actually been a guest on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos in the past. But then they transition over to this failed rescue attempt on these hostages, and they do this weird juxtaposition between that and some comments that Hillary Clinton made this last week that they're calling controversial and sort of taking out of context after, which I'll explain after I show you that clip here.
Chris, military and U.S. government sources say a team of Navy SEALs...
We'll discuss the latest decision not to indict a white police officer in the death of an unarmed black man with one of the most influential voices in American media, conservative radio talk show host Rush Limbaugh. And will Republicans use the power of the purse to take a hard line against President Obama's executive orders?
The president thumbed his nose at the American people with his actions on immigration.
If you shut down the government, you go too far, it becomes about us. And the last time we did this, it didn't work out too well for us.
Rush Limbaugh. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Then, a U.S. hostage is killed by al-Qaeda during a failed rescue mission. But Hillary Clinton says smart power is showing respect for America's enemies.
Trying to understand, and insofar as psychologically possible, empathize with their perspective and point of view.
Our Sunday panel discusses her controversial comments.
Controversial on Fox News. I've noticed when I've been watching Fox News on and off this last week that they've been hyping those comments from Hillary Clinton. They seem to have a big effort trying to find things to gotcha quotes from Hillary Clinton, preparing to bring down her numbers before she runs for president, assuming that's what she's doing. And I don't know. I think one of the problems that the United States got into with this whole ISIS threat, ISIS taking over parts of Iraq and Syria, is that they didn't respect their power enough. And I think that's kind of the context she was talking in. And they're, of course, trying to, trump it up into some kind of gotcha thing. Although the report from Fox News Sunday on the failed rescue attempt, I didn't think it was really harsh on the fact that the Obama administration tried this and failed it. That's kind of the thing. The Republican right often won't attack President Obama when he does something with the military because they're so attached to the military, and so they don't want to attack the military even though President Obama is the commander-in-chief. And so you can see that first. I'm going to show a couple reports on this failed attempt to rescue these hostages. First from Fox News Sunday, then from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Here's Catherine Herridge for the first clip here.
Thank you, Chris. Military and U.S. government sources say a team of Navy SEALs walked nearly 7 miles in darkness to a heavily fortified al-Qaeda compound in central Yemen when they came under fire. As the SEALs confronted al-Qaeda militants in the darkness, one of the terrorists apparently broke away to where the hostages were held. American journalist Luke Summers and a second hostage, now identified as a South African school teacher Pierre, were found alive but wounded. Both men were transported on a waiting Osprey. Corky died on the rescue aircraft. Summers reached the USS the Macon Island but died in surgery. The President and Defense Secretary approved the mission Friday morning based on new intelligence that Summers' life was in imminent danger. The raid, the second rescue attempt in 10 days, was monitored in real time here in Washington, and Secretary Hagel received regular updates on his flight to Kabul, Afghanistan, where he addressed reporters.
Luke Summers was murdered. He was taken hostage. His life was clearly in danger. Of course, have to take responsibilities for any action or inaction. or inaction that we didn't take.
U.S. government and military sources stressed there was no way the hostages were wounded in the crossfire. They were shot by al-Qaeda in a last desperate act. Chris.
So I guess there's no way to know if that's true, but that's one of the talking points that the military got out, both to Fox News Sunday and also to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. You'll see that fact about it being one of the al-Qaeda terrorists, not one of the Navy SEALs that attempted the rescue who killed the hostages or shot the hostages. And then you'll see a couple additional facts that didn't make it into the Fox News Sunday summary in this report from Brian Ross, where he also mentions that urination may be the thing that foiled this rescue attempt. And he also that ends with this kind of sad fact about the South African hostage who died over in this clip.
U.S. officials say the president gave the okay for the raid after intelligence reports indicated al-Qaeda was about to carry out its threat to execute the 33-year-old Luke Summers.
It was a high-risk mission to begin with, launched under an almost full moon from a U.S. airbase in Djibouti around 1 a.m. local time.
It was a very dangerous and complicated mission, but like always in these efforts, there's risk.
Some 40 commanders from the elite SEAL Team 6 landed about 6 miles away from the al-Qaeda hideout to avoid being detected by the aircraft noise. The team made its way on foot to within 100 yards of the objective when, a U.S. counterterrorist source tells ABC News, one of the al-Qaeda guards who had gone outside to relieve himself spotted the team. What ensued was a fierce 10-minute gun battle in which most, but not all, al-Qaeda guards were killed, with none of the U.S. forces injured. But U.S. officials say one of the attackers was seen racing inside the building and is believed to have shot both Summers and a second hostage. One of them died from his wounds, being flown out to a U.S. Navy ship offshore. The other died in the ship's medical facility. Summers, who grew up in Sacramento, had worked in Yemen as a photojournalist until he was kidnapped 14 months ago. U.S. officials denounced what they called his brutal murder.
We will be relentless in our efforts to bring to justice those who have caused this death. Some already have been brought to justice in the raid, but there's much more to do.
The other hostage killed was a South African teacher, Pierre. The group he worked for said they had negotiated for him to be released today and home in time for Christmas, George.
That's a tough one, okay?
Yeah, that is a tough one, and I want to show one more clip on this failed hostage rescue just to emphasize the point I was making before about how Republicans are more soft in their criticism of this kind of military action because they don't want to criticize the actual military. This is Republican Mike Rogers, who was over on CNN's State of the Union saying how difficult these kinds of operations are instead of criticizing President Obama, as he more often does on clips I show you on LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup. But here he is talking to Candy Crowley yesterday morning in this clip.
Obviously, these are very, very, very difficult undertakings. Sometimes we get numb to the fact when they're successful that they must be easier or we must be so good that no mistake can happen. It was a part of a series of events. This was the second. Information was obviously good. The intelligence was good. Unfortunately, in something like this, they do try to prevent that they being the terrorists that are holding these hostages are trying to set up a perimeter to stop it. And unfortunately, that's what they ran into on the way in.
So in the first attempt, we know they went and did not find Luke Summers. That's who they were looking for. But they used information from that first attempt to find him a second time.
That's correct.
What does...
So yeah, that actually, I wanted to include that last piece of information from Candy Crowley about how this was actually an ongoing rescue attempt. And I don't know, I didn't show some clips of arguments about whether paying ransom to al-Qaeda, which, this was not ISIS, this is al-Qaeda in Yemen, which has traditionally taken hostages and tried to get ransom for them rather than beheading them on video like ISIS has been doing, and they apparently killed these hostages, if you believe the American version, or shot the hostages only when they realized that there was a rescue attempt happening. And so usually people pay ransom, like apparently they were South Africa, or some private interest in South Africa had paid for this other hostage to be released, and he was about to be released. And I don't know, you can let me know what you think as to whether paying ransom for hostages is humane to get them home, or whether it promotes more hostage taking. Even though it's kind of a Republican idea, I actually lean a little more towards the latter, that you really shouldn't pay ransom to hostage takers like Al-Qaeda in Yemen there. But I'm going to disagree with the Republicans a lot more in this next issue I want to cover for you, this torture report, which I think may be coming out Tuesday, so while I'm broadcasting that's tomorrow. I've covered it on previous editions of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. They've been promising to release this report. It's the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, chaired by Dianne Feinstein. Remember, there was this whole weird thing where the CIA went into the computers they were letting the Senate use and erased some of the files, and it had to do with this torture report. And apparently it's going to be really harsh on the CIA. As you can see, Bob Schieffer sort of summarize on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday morning over in this clip.
This week, the Senate Intelligence Committee is expected to issue a long-expected report on the CIA's interrogation practices that were adopted in the aftermath of 9/11. This report is scheduled to be released Tuesday, but it is so controversial and is expected to be so explosive that Secretary of State John Kerry called Committee Chair Dianne Feinstein last week and expressed concern that its release now could endanger American facilities overseas, as well as the lives of American diplomats and intelligence officers. We have learned that the report, which was approved only by Democrats on the committee, concludes that the CIA routinely went beyond what was legally allowable in using techniques including waterboarding. It says these techniques were not effective in getting information, and it alleges the agency systematically lied to itself, to the White House, the Department of Justice, and to Congress about the effectiveness of the program in order to keep it going. While the
So that kind of sounds like a public smackdown of the CIA, and that is exactly the phrase that CBS Justice correspondent Bob Orr used when describing what this report is supposed to show, also talking to Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday over in let me make sure I get the right clip. This clip.
Well, Senator Feinstein's in a tight spot, and she's not tipping her hand, Bob. But I think everyone we've talked to expects the report to come out probably on Tuesday. If it does come out, as you outlined, this will be a public smackdown of the CIA. This essentially will accuse the agency, in very strong language, I'm told, of going outside the law, doing too much without authority to try to get information from these al-Qaeda detainees. On top of that, the committee, the Democrats on the committee, are going to allege that this went for no purpose. No good intelligence was gleaned. Well, the CIA is going to defend itself. They're not going to necessarily defend the policy, but they are going to say, look, we tried to stay within the bounds of the law in the shadow of 9/11 when things were very, very tough. We made some mistakes, but in the end, real intelligence was had.
But we all...
So that's kind of the reporting on the public smackdown, but there was also an obvious reaction that's going on, and I guess there's a whole other side being prepared to defend the CIA. That was exemplified also in an interview on CBS's Face the Nation. They had on former director of the CIA, Michael Hayden. He wasn't there at the beginning of the Bush administration. I think he was, I think they'll say CIA director from 2006 to 2009. And he kind of weaseled through this a little bit by, at some points, talking about waterboarding and when that stopped, but then at other points talking about, well, he didn't use the phrase enhanced interrogation techniques, I don't think, but he talked about waterboarding to say how it happened to only 3 people and it stopped in like 2003, but then later he talks about how these things were ongoing when he got there and he reduced them, but thought they had been so effective that he couldn't completely get rid of them, but not waterboarding, other unspecified techniques, I guess. But first, here he is talking about the end of waterboarding before Obama got there, over in this clip.
General Michael Hayden, he ran the CIA from 2006 to 2009. He's in Orange County, California this morning. General, was the CIA, we know that there was waterboarding in those months after 9/11. Was that still taking place when you were the director?
No, it wasn't, Bob. And in fact, while I was director and under President Bush's guidance, we took waterboarding off the table. The popular story is that President Obama had done that. Actually, it was long gone before he became president. And the last person waterboarded, of a total of 3, was in March of 2003.
Do you...
So by talking about waterboarding there, he gives the impression that it wasn't President Obama who ended torture, because he, had this executive order ending torture once he got there. But in this subsequent answer, you can see when Bob Schieffer asked him, well, did torture work? Or, is that, because that's one of the things that this Senate report says is torture doesn't work, which all the evidence, reliable evidence I've seen, shows that torture doesn't work because you get some information, but then also a lot of made up stuff, because people just say anything they can think of. If they don't know the answer, they make something up, and you can't really tell the reliable from the unreliable. But here you can see Michael Hayden saying that torture does work, and talking about how when he got to the CIA, they were still doing some kind of techniques that he reduced but couldn't get rid of because not in good conscience, because they just were so effective. Over in this clip.
Do you think the report did? I mean, do you think these practices did do any good? Did you get information?
Bob, I was a blank sheet when I went into CIA in late May of 2006. This was the elephant in the room. What were we going to do with this program? This had not been my program up to that point. I was free to stop it cold. And I spent the summer of 2006 looking at the facts, documents, and most importantly, Bob, people. I talked to analysts. I talked to interrogators. And at the end of the summer, I recommended to President Bush that we reduce the program, that we reduced the number of techniques, but that the program had been so valuable that we couldn't stop it altogether, even though now we had so much more intelligence on al-Qaeda from the detainees and other sources. Even then, the program had proven its worth, that I did not, in conscience, Bob, in conscience, I couldn't take it off the table.
What?
So yeah, you can see that's, I don't know, you can let me know if you think that is a contradiction, General Michael Hayden there, between saying that they stopped the waterboarding in 2003, but then when he got there in 2006, there are all these unspecified techniques that were so effective he couldn't end them all. And in addition to the supposed effectiveness of torture, which I think is bogus, another argument that also seems kind of not evidence-based. You'll see it's kind of faith-based. This is from Republican Mike Rogers back on CNN State of the Union talking to Candy Crowley, where he's making this additional argument that release of the Senate report is going to cause violence and death. I think he'll say that several times in this answer. And that's what people are saying. You can't release this report because it's going to cause people to attack our embassies or our facilities or people who helped us torture, even though they're not going to be named. And as to why we should believe that's going to happen, it's because people, all these important people are saying it or believe it. And that's really the only evidence you can see from Mike Rogers on CNN State of the Union on Sunday morning over in this clip.
No, I think this is a terrible idea. So our foreign partners are telling us this will cause violence and deaths. Our foreign leaders have approached the government and said, you do this, this will cause violence and deaths. Our own intelligence community has assessed that this will cause violence and deaths.
Because why? Because other countries, and they're not going to name other countries in interrogating and holding suspected terrorists. So if they don't name it and they don't have things that otherwise identify a country, why would it cause?
Well, certainly, again, these foreign leaders believe it will. Our intelligence community believes it will. And our foreign liaison partners believe it will, because we have seen what happens when other incidents are used in the propaganda terrorist machine to incite violence. Think of the cartoons in Denmark and how many people died as a result. Think of the burning of the Korans and how many people died as a result. They will use this to incite violence. And here's the scary part about this. Well, again, Secretary Kerry has engaged in this because he believes this is dangerous to what they're trying to accomplish overseas. That tells you something. This is more than just differences on what happened. This is, and then you have to ask this, Candy, what good will come of this report? There's been a Department of Justice investigation. It was stopped under the Bush administration. There has been congressional action to stop this activity. President Obama put an executive order saying he wouldn't continue any of that activity, not that it was going on, it had since been stopped. So you have to ask yourself, if you know that all of those learned people believe that people will die because of this report, what good can come of it, knowing all of that all those other things have actually happened?
Now, I don't know whether there will be violence that results from the release of this report, but I actually would believe, I've argued this in previous videos about like whether Abu Ghraib, the release of photos from Abu Ghraib is responsible for violence, that it's not actually the release of the photos, it's what happened that is the cause, the real cause. If you don't want people to react violently to bad behavior by the U.S. government, it's not hiding it that's the solution, it's stopping it. And in the long run, having more accountability than we've had even from the Obama administration, that didn't want to look backward but look forward and didn't really bring anyone to accountability for what happened. This could be the closest we get to some accountability, at least shaming the CIA if nothing else. And speaking of lack of shame, I guess, I want to show one more clip on this from former President George W. Bush, who was also had this long interview on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley. Part 2 is going to be next week, and I'm going to spare you listening to a lot of it. But this is, I think, an even worse argument. In my notes, I have this written down is like, I knew these torturers, and they were good people. That's basically, he's vouching for them because they are good people and patriots over in this clip.
We're fortunate to have men and women who work hard at the CIA serving on our behalf. These are patriots. And whatever the report says, if it diminishes their contributions to our country, it is way off base. And I knew the directors, I knew the deputy directors, I knew a lot of the operators. These are good people, really good people, and we're lucky as a nation to have them.
Yeah, that kind of amused me. You can let me know if you think I knew these torturers and they're good people and patriots, if that argument persuades you. But I want to move on to the next topic. This is the last topic I'm going to show clips on. This is an issue that's really important to me, the idea of comprehensive immigration reform. I've covered going back more than a year, going back almost to the beginning of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I've done a lot of local activism on behalf of undocumented immigrants. Last Friday, I actually was part of a small group that went and met with my Sacramento County Sheriff, Scott Jones, who had a little notoriety, got on Fox News a couple times with his reaction to the broken immigration system. And this is creating a split in the Republican Party, it seems, about those who want to be more anti-Obama and more extreme in the way they react to this completely lawful executive action, as I'll explain at the end of the clips. But first, I want to show a pretty good overview of what's gone on in especially in the Republican Party, the split between the people who want to react more strongly and then the people who want to sort of smooth over the differences. This is a report from Luke Russert over on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday morning over here.
Finding out all week.
Campaign saying if you elect us, we will stop President Obama's amnesty. Do what you said you would do.
This week, the specter of a shutdown sequel. With government funding set to expire on Thursday, Texas Senator Ted Cruz took on Republican leaders again, channeling the distrust many conservatives have on immigration.
Some will say, we'll vote to fund it for now, and then we'll have reinforcements from the Senate next year.
Despite the heated rhetoric, Republican leaders insist the government will stay open. After a largely symbolic vote this week, chastising the president for his executive action, they'll pass a funding bill with Democratic help. And they say the GOP will bring up immigration legislation in the new year.
There is no one in responsible Republican leadership, elected officials, that has said we should deport 13 or 11 million people. Even in our wildest dream would not be to remove any person that might be here unless they were dangerous to this country and did not committed a crime.
But Republicans who have backed immigration legislation in the past have been punished by the right. Florida's Marco Rubio got beat up on talk radio when he campaigned for the Senate bill last year.
Leaving things the way they are, that's the real amnesty.
Rubio's approval dropped among conservatives, and he withdrew support for comprehensive reform. In January, House Republican leaders tried to steer their own conference toward a bill.
The plan that you guys are going to push will have a pathway to legalization but not citizenship. Is that how you understand it?
That's right, but it also involved basically a probationary kind of a status to make sure that a person is not rewarding for having broken our laws.
That effort quickly broke down, with conservatives crying amnesty. Also, rank-and-file Republicans were apprehensive about voting on the issue after it played a role in Eric Cantor's primary defeat in June. In candid moments, House Speaker John Boehner has griped about how hard it is to corral his members.
Here's the attitude. Oh, don't make me do this. Oh, this is too hard.
GOP leaders in Congress are poised to win this short-term fight with conservatives. But as Republican governors suit, the party still faces the same long-term immigration problem it did 18 months ago.
If we don't pass immigration reform, if we don't get it off the table in a reasonable, practical way, it doesn't matter who you run in 2016. We're in a demographic death spiral as a party.
For Meet the Press, Luke Russert.
Sorry, apparently I had some sort of technical difficulty. I'm not sure exactly what the last clip was. Did I get all the way through the torture report? I hope I got all the way through the torture report, and I want to move on to an issue that has really been important to me that I've covered for a long time on LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. This is the issue of comprehensive immigration reform, the broken immigration system. I've done a lot of local work to try to help the rights of immigrants and undocumented immigrants here where I live in Sacramento County. I even was part of a meeting with the Sacramento County Sheriff last Friday where we were trying to get him to be more respectful of the needs of the immigrants and especially undocumented immigrants here in Sacramento. And so I want to cover this split in the Republican Party as to how to react to President Obama's executive action that gave deferred action on deportation to 4 to 5 million possibly undocumented immigrants, even though it's just temporary because it's an executive action, not a change in the law by Congress. And I want to show a good summary of the split in the Republican Party from NBC's Meet the Press this morning. This is reporter Luke Russert summarizing. He starts with a clip from Ted Cruz and then contrasts it with some of the other Republicans who don't want to be as confrontational. And you can see that clip over here.
Finding out all week.
Just about every Republican candidate in the country campaigned saying, if you elect us, we will stop President Obama's amnesty. Do what you said you would do.
This week, the specter of a shutdown sequel. With government funding set to expire on Thursday, Texas Senator Ted Cruz took on Republican leaders again, channeling the distrust many conservatives have on immigration.
Some will say, well, vote to fund it for now, and then we'll have reinforcements from the Senate next year.
Despite the heated rhetoric, Republican leaders insist the government will stay open. After a largely symbolic vote this week, chastising the president for his executive action, they'll pass a funding bill with Democratic help. And they say the GOP will bring up immigration legislation in the new year.
There is no one in responsible Republican leadership, elected officials, that has said we should deport 13 or 11 million people. Even in our wildest dream would not be to remove any person that might be here unless they were dangerous to this country and did not committed a crime.
But Republicans who have backed immigration legislation in the past have been punished by the right. Florida's Marco Rubio got beat up on talk radio when he campaigned for the Senate bill last year.
Leaving things the way they are, that's the real amnesty.
Rubio's approval dropped among conservatives, and he withdrew support for comprehensive reform. In January, House Republican leaders tried to steer their own conference toward a bill.
The plan that you guys are going to push will have a pathway to legalization but not citizenship. Is that how you understand it?
That's right, but it also involved basically a probationary kind of a status to make sure that a person is not rewarding for having broken our laws.
That effort quickly broke down, with conservatives crying amnesty. Also, rank-and-file Republicans were apprehensive about voting on the issue after it played a role in Eric Cantor's primary defeat in June. In candid moments, House Speaker John Boehner has griped about how hard it is to corral his members.
Here's the attitude. Oh, don't make me do this. Oh, this is too hard.
GOP leaders in Congress are poised to win this short-term fight with conservatives. But as Republican governors sue to challenge the president's action, the party still faces the same long-term immigration problem it did 18 months ago.
If we don't pass immigration reform, if we don't get it off the table in a reasonable, practical way, it doesn't matter who you run in 2016. We're in a demographic death spiral as a party.
For Meet the Press, Luke Russert.
So I thought that report from Luke Russert on Meet the Press was a good analysis of the split in the Republican Party, although I guess you didn't need to go that long to show the split. I think it was actually exemplified over on Fox News Sunday. They had the senator-elect from Louisiana. On Saturday they had the runoff, and Senator Mary Landrieu is not reelected. She won't be coming back in January, so Dr. Bill Cassidy will be taking her seat. I think, what is it now? They picked up 9 seats in the November election in the U.S. Senate, the Republicans. And so if you want to see the split in the Republican Party on immigration, you can see it when Senator-elect Bill Cassidy won't give an answer to what he thinks should be the Republican reaction. This actually kind of reminds me of that Republican criticism of Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, where she made that comment, you have to pass Obamacare to see what's in it, where she was actually saying that you had to pass it and then people will find out when it's implemented what's in it. But here you can, this clip I wrote in my notes, you have to elect your senator to find out what his position on immigration is, because he dodges the question and says he needs to study the issue over in this clip.
You strongly oppose, along with a lot of other Republicans, the executive action that President Obama took that will defer deportations for millions of people in this country illegally. It looks now like the plan by Republican leaders in both the House and the Senate is they will fund the entire government through next September, but only fund the Department of Homeland Security, which handles immigration, till either February or March. Are you okay with that?
I've been focused on December the 6th. On the face of it, I am. We have to consider this issue from a position of strength. Once Republicans take the Senate, we'll be in a position of strength. But allow me to look at it a little bit more carefully now that my election is over.
Finally,
I don't know, aren't you supposed to come up with your positions before you're elected to the Senate? Especially on something as basic as the president's executive action that he's been promising for over a year and was supposed to do before the election. And anyway, I also want to show you a couple clips from NBC's Meet the Press where they had on the governor-elect of Texas, former attorney general, so he's supposed to be a lawyer and know the law. And I thought that on the issue of standing, he's suing. Texas is one of the lead states suing President Obama for this executive action, and one of the things they have to show is standing. That means they have to show that they're harmed by President Obama's executive action, and he makes this sort of tenuous connection between the inflow of children into the United States. These, you know, that whole situation at the border that happened over the summer that I reported on LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, where people, all these kids from Central America were coming in to take advantage of what was actually a law passed under George W. Bush that said if you didn't come from Mexico or Canada, that they couldn't immediately deport you. So it actually had nothing to do with President Obama, but you can see the governor-elect of Texas, Greg Abbott, blames President Obama's DACA decision to defer deportation for the so-called dreamers, the kids who were brought here as kids and more than five years ago, and or had to be under 16, and there are all these like restrictions, so it didn't even apply to everyone it should have, and so it couldn't have actually caused these kids from Central America to come if it didn't cause all these kids from Mexico to come. But anyway, I think Chuck Todd let Governor-elect of Texas Greg Abbott get away with this really tenuous argument over in this clip.
As to the standing issue, understand this: Texas has been at the epicenter of the 2012 DACA. You all saw more than 1,000 people crossing our border each and every day. Texas has come out of pocket to the tune of more than $100 million in law enforcement, and education, and health care because of what has happened. And understand this: the president's agencies' memos themselves have indicated that there will be more problems like this resulting from the next presidential order, or the most recent presidential order.
But many of those and the children they came across in that wave, and I understand there's a lot of people that say that that wave was started, and some people believe it was inspired by the DACA order on children that were brought here by parents illegally. But a lot of those folks were deported. Most of those folks were deported.
Well, as we speak right now, some of those children are in Texas schools. Some of the people who came here across the border are accessing.
But most of them were deported, right? Fair enough? I mean,
I don't know the raw number.
Okay.
All I do know is the absolute fact, and that is Texas has incurred taxpayer dollars out of pocket as a result of their prior executive order. It's also been stated by members of the Obama administration that this new executive order will lead to the same results.
Now, when we talk...
Now, that's a really bogus argument in terms of standing, and because I don't think it really shows harm, especially it has to be not just, you have to show the money that he's claiming that undocumented immigrants cause Texas to lose, which is a problem I'll show in the next clip. But what I think Chuck Todd didn't really challenge him on was the causal relationship between what President Obama is doing and undocumented immigrants coming into Texas, because, like I said, DACA didn't really cause those kids to come in over the summer, and this latest executive action only applies to people who have been here for, I think it's 5 years, so it can't really, at least if you're an informed undocumented immigrant coming over the border, you know that this latest executive action is not going to do anything for you. And in fact, there are a lot of undocumented immigrants already in the United States who aren't helping. You know, there are what, 11, 12 million, and this helps like 4 or 5 million. So most aren't, who are already here, aren't helped. So I don't know why it would give false hope to people who aren't even here yet. But the part that Chuck Todd actually did challenge Governor Greg Abbott on was this idea that his state has been harmed by having to pay for that. The kids who are actually in his schools now must actually, the reason they weren't deported, I guess, is because they're really refugees. They made it into like the refugee program, and so he shouldn't be complaining about that. But Chuck Todd also points out that undocumented immigrants are really important to the economy of Texas and are probably a net economic benefit. And Greg Abbott, who's supposedly an attorney and, you know, former attorney general or current attorney general of Texas, about to become governor of Texas, he claims that it doesn't matter that Texas is benefiting, and I don't think that is actually true under the legal doctrine of standing. But here you can see him make that argument over in this clip.
We talk about harm. I want to get into this financial issue here, because you talk about the issue of social services, how much money you have to spend to deal with these undocumented folks. But illegal immigrants that are working in Texas do participate in the economy. There have been some estimates that if you deported everybody who was in Texas illegally, it would actually be it would create an economic recession for the state of Texas. So how do you separate those two facts?
Because we're not suing for that economic harm. It's the way that Texas has been impacted that gives us standing. What we're suing for is actually the greater harm, and that is harm to the Constitution by empowering the President of the United States to enact legislation on his own without going through Congress.
I want to play for you.
So that does not make legal sense to me. I have to research a little more to give you actual citations, but what seemed kind of dubious especially was the way he sort of pivoted to say, oh, it doesn't really matter because the real harm's to the Constitution. That's like something a politician would say, not what a lawyer would say arguing to a judge. I don't think it really makes sense in terms of the harm you need to show in standing. And I want to show one more clip. This is Julian Castro, he's a member of the Obama administration, so I assume he's been briefed with Obama administration talking points, and I think he makes a much stronger argument that this lawsuit is pretty bogus over back on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley in this clip.
It's very clear on the law, the merits, that lawsuit will not stand up. I expect that it's not going to, that Texas, that the Attorney General, now governor, soon to be governor, will find that that lawsuit does not have merit. The president, by taking that executive action, is very clearly trying to address a broken immigration system and take a strong first step to fix it, focusing on felons, not families, ensuring that we do everything that we can to secure the border, and also give folks who have been here oftentimes for many years the opportunity to pay back taxes, to stay here with their family, to get right by the law, as he has said. But what Congress can do, and what Attorney General Abbott, soon to be Governor Abbott, should do, is to advocate passing a bill, passing legislation, so that we can have comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate has already done it, and now it's time for the House to do the same. Well, in fact,
so I agree with almost everything that you heard there, and like I said, I think that's the Obama administration talking point, since Julian Castro is now Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and so he's in the Obama administration. And it's not that much of a legal argument, but I've put a link down in the video description. You can find this National Immigration Law Center webpage where they talk about the broad authority of the president. It's not just a constitutional issue. The thing is, in the immigration law that Congress has passed already, they give the executive a lot of discretion to decide who's deportable and who gets work permits and who gets deferred action. It's not just like the generic prosecutorial discretion, although that also gives the president a lot of power to decide who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. And that is the last thing I want to show you for this Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup that I had to delay till Monday morning. Now it's Monday afternoon. I apologize for that. I don't know why. Somehow I stopped broadcasting. I don't know. Everything is like well connected here, so I don't know why that happened. But also, I did get some contributions. If you're watching this as a recorded show, there should be a little eye up in the upper left-hand corner that you can click on if you want to donate to help me not have to put so many ads in the middle of this show, and I'm going to do them every 30 minutes this week. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I'm going to try to see if I can get rid of that, if there's some function on YouTube where I can get rid of that technical glitch where there's a big blank spot. But I appreciate all of you who stood by the broadcast, even though it's at the wrong time and there was a big blank spot in the middle of it. I think at one point I had 82 people, still about 70 of you watching, and I've been reading your comments along the way, but I'm tired, so tired. Must end show, and I will be back at the regular time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time next Sunday, and a little later in the week I will upload video from the ACLU event I was at yesterday, which was why I couldn't complete the show at the right time. And there was a good speech by Professor Pam Samuelson, who is a pioneer in online digital rights. I think I'm going to call it Is There Public Interest in Technology Law, or something like that was one of the points she made. So look for that coming up sometime in the next few days. And I appreciate all of you who joined me on this weird time to watch the show. I hope you liked the clips I picked out for all of you and left you more informed about what the corporate media here in the United States thinks is important in the political realm or news analysis. So I'll be trying to do that again for you next week, Sunday night, and I'll be seeing you all around the internet.